Hello, everyone, and welcome back. After a little short hiatus, I can't wait to return and bring some good content to you guys. Really excited for this episode, and as always, I'm Randon, and you're tuned in to Don't Worry, We'll Talk It Out. So today I'm going to be focused on a very complex and intricate idea. This idea has a lot of political, cultural, and social dynamics to it that I'll really have to get into before I get into the meat of my discussion. Now, this idea, of course, as you can tell by the title, is called cancel culture. To really encapsulate the problems that I see with this culture, I need to delve into aspects of celebrityism, celebrity culture, forgiveness, and moral standards of today to really make sense of this idea. So we have to start with the term, of course, and its meaning. Cancel culture is one of the more complicated trends to hit the internet in recent years. It's the idea of publicly shaming of an individual, usually through social media platforms like Twitter or Facebook, that aims to hold someone accountable for a questionable statement they made, either in the present, sometime in the past, or, in extreme cases, what they might say in the future. Now, usually these people are celebrities, or at least someone of high respect and esteem. Say, for example, Brett Weinstein, a college professor who was ousted at Evergreen College a few years ago. Some of my older viewers may remember another term that was used kind of in the 80s and 90s, termed political correctness. Cancel culture is essentially a more extreme version of this, and it's somewhat of a boycott of sorts, except instead of a company, you're boycotting an individual. It started out as a vigilante strategy for bringing justice and accountability to powerful people who previously had been immune to those sort of consequences. Some argue that it's too harsh, others argue that it doesn't have any real consequences in the world. Now, certainly, it has ruined people's reputations and chances at, say, business or future educational opportunities. And in many cases, rightfully so. Say in the case of literal neo-Nazi Richard Spencer. But to me, it's also created a mob-like mentality, thereby any minuscule mistake makes it open season for intense backlash, possibly forever. I guess my main thing is that I want to bring some honesty into this conversation. In actuality, we're not that different. In fact, most of us are painfully ordinary. I do personally believe cancel culture exists, but as of most things, it exists on a spectrum. I believe it has the propensity to truly hurt people, celebrities and civilians alike. And worse, it might never allow us to fully learn from our mistakes. But where I'd like to start is this. Part 1, Celebrity Culture. We know that celebrities are real people. Yet it has become increasingly difficult for the public to be aware that these people are just as likely to make mistakes as the average person. The moral hierarchy of celebrities has been noticeable in society since, society began. Talent, wealth, and fame have become synonymous with a person's character. And in a way, if we stopped deifying these individuals, certain people would not be as disappointed when those entertainers or public figures make mistakes. In part, that's because as much as we feel like we know these people, we really don't. They're primarily products of our own invention, and it's difficult to empathize with an imaginary friend. Now, just as most things in life, context matters. One can acknowledge a historical wrong while acknowledging the potentiality for change. Calling out injustice, sexual abuse, and corruption are all inherently important to changing the status quo that we so hope to change. Some examples of this include R. Kelly, Harvey Weinstein, and Bill Cosby. Are some examples that come to mind of cancel culture being used in a positive and successful way to bring about justice from individuals who have used their power and success to get what they want for most of their time. Even though celebrities bear the brunt of cancel culture, there are some instances, and almost dystopian instances, of civilians getting canceled for misperceived notions of what they may or may not have done. My first example is Emmanuel Cafferty, who worked for Gas and Electric in San Diego. While holding his arm out of the window of his pickup truck, A driver took a photo of Cafferty with his hand making the universal OK sign, except that is not what the driver of the other vehicle accused Emanuel of. He claimed Emanuel was a white supremacist. See, the neo-Nazi movement has appropriated the OK sign to be a symbol for white power, so they could theoretically dog whistle to each other in public without others noticing. Now, if you polled most of the country, most people, of course, wouldn't know this very obscure and almost memed fact. Now, Emanuel, whose mother is Latina, was flummoxed. He tried to prove in every way possible to his company that he simply wasn't a white supremacist, even going as far as to show the color of his skin to his bosses to prove that it just didn't make any sense. One would hope that when a celebrity or civilian is called out in an instance where they say didn't commit a felony, they could prove they wronged, acknowledge their wrong, and do something to correct that past or present mistake. But the real question is this: will the public accept their apology? Justin Trudeau is the next one that comes to my mind. Trudeau is the current Prime Minister of Canada. And Trudeau, over the last year, has had 3 instances of wearing black and brown face during his high school and college life surface. One instance, as you can see right here, Mr. Trudeau attended a party with the themed Arabian Nights and dressed up as Aladdin, complete with even painting his arms, back, and hands a dark brown. Granted, there is a difference between truly problematic and woeful ignorance. Now, this event should be taken for what it is: an example of an ignorant young man who was really unaware of the social implications that he was doing at the time, and at a time when the world and the moral standards that we hold ourselves to today were very different than what we're seeing now. Now, the real question is this: is Trudeau a racist? Well, of course, I don't know him personally, and I'm not from Canada, but from his track record as Prime Minister, it seems his evolution from that mistake started long before these images came out. In fact, Trudeau's 3-minute apology about this incident seems very sincere and aware of the racist overtones he represented at that time. Now, some people may accept the apology and some won't, but this itches at one of my main critiques of cancel culture. If we begin to constantly judge history from the past with the same moral standards of today, well, I think we're in a world of trouble, which leads to my second observation. Part 2, moral standards of today. Most would agree that judging history via today's moral framework is illogical, a lose-lose either way. But this combination of cancel culture phenomena mixed with the recent events of, say, protesters toppling down historical monuments across America, it's hard not to view history from our point of view, currently in today's time. We have adopted a moral high ground, saying, how ruthless and callous were these people of the past? I mean, how could they bring about such oppression? Did they know what they were doing? I'm not saying it's unfair to never judge anyone from history. It's actually fairly obvious to find someone who was acting in bad faith and their intent was pure evil. Andrew Jackson, for instance, one of America's presidents, the creator of the Indian Removal Act and eventually the Trail of Tears, essentially participated in genocide. His statue should absolutely be removed from any courthouse or public area, in my opinion, and be put into a museum to be studied historically to understand why he did those things that he did and put it in a real historical context, which makes sense. But if we were to scrutinize even our most well-beloved and known activists, we'd find some cancerable material. And I wonder if they lived in today's time, would these men and women be judged for what they eventually became or who they were? Malcolm Little, born 1946, had to hustle to live on the streets by himself in his teen years. Drug dealing, prostitution, gambling, and even robbery. After being convicted of a 10-year sentence, would emerge as Malcolm X and become one of the most well-known and prolific activists of all time. Martin Luther King Jr., one of the most beloved and cherished activists of all time, is known to have participated in infidelity against his wife, Coretta Scott King, via FBI surveillance for nearly 12 years.
Mahatma Gandhi is known to have used vulgar derogatory terms toward African blacks in his early 20s, saying that white people should be the predominating race in South Africa and that black people lived like animals. But of course, later in his life, he would cast aside these debilitating racist beliefs and work toward peace, tranquility, and an end to discrimination. In this era of cancel culture, would these revered figures have survived? Would we have accepted their apologies when their private lives were cast into the public sphere? Would their past transgressions ruin the men they ended up becoming? When we see certain individuals as saints, as heroic figures who transcended humanity and morality, we literally put them on a pedestal, making their accomplishments almost inaccessible to most of us, which is a nice sounding way of letting ourselves off the hook. Which leads to my final observation of the podcast. Part 3, forgiveness. To forgive yourself is to forgive the world. During my own journey over the past almost month of self-forgiveness, it's really changed how I view other individuals' actions and mistakes, from average citizens to even our most cherished historical figures. Throughout history, it seems it's always been easier to shoot down the person instead of the idea. This is even more prevalent nowadays in cancel culture. Along with the combination of social media, cancel culture has created in us a need to be right, a need to be first, a need to be heard instead of the ability to listen to others. And it's created a vicious cycle of us versus them mentality. The good news is, while judgment is a contagious behavior, so is forgiveness. I'd like to end the podcast with a story of hope and a story of change. It starts with Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis is the man with the world's strangest day job. See, Davis, a black man, goes out of his way to befriend KKK members. Yeah, you heard that right. He attends Klan rallies, befriends some members over the next few months and years. He would have conversations with them, drink beer with them, and slowly dispel any wayward racist ideology that they held. Over the years, he has literally convinced hundreds of white supremacists to de-radicalize and remove the hateful white cloth from their heads. But he doesn't deny that some men are truly incapable of saving. However, that acknowledgement doesn't deter his mission. It doesn't deter that he continues to focus on those who are open to conversation, open to civil discourse, open to friendship, and eventually open to changing. I'm going to end this podcast with a quote from Davis, who said, "We've got to treat it down to the bone, which is ignorance. The cure for ignorance is education. You fix the ignorance, there's nothing to fear. If there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to hate. If there's nothing to hate, there's nothing or no one to destroy." As always, guys, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Randon, and you have been listening to Don't Worry, We'll Talk It Out.
Progress is made when you give somebody a platform where they can express their views, even if you don't agree with them. When two enemies are talking, they're not fighting, they're talking. It's when the talking ceases that the ground becomes fertile for violence.